Awesome. Well, appreciate you being here. And Mr. Gates is walking around because he's got some ideas too. So approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Everything looked good.
I'll make a motion we accept them.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving forward, he's not on, correct? He's not on.
Josh Libby is not joined us, right? He is on?
Yes, Josh, can you hear us? I think we're gonna jump into pipeline is not here. We're gonna jump into community solar and residential solar with Josh, correct?
Good morning, everybody. How are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
Oh, just dandy for a Friday, right?
Yes, sir. My world, we don't work on Fridays, so.
I wish I had that problem once in a while, you know?
I just don't work most days, but hey, anyways. So appreciate you being here with us today, and you're going to speak on behalf of the solar projects, correct? And help us get through some of this stuff and understanding the difference between residential and community solar, where they fit. Have you had a chance to look at our ordinance that we have in place for our SESs, and can you give us any guidance as to how we need to change some of this? I know for me particularly, residential, do we need to have fencing? I know that's a conversation that we continue to have come up because of electrical codes and so on and so forth. I know it has to happen with the large projects, but on residential and even community solar, does fencing need to exist?
Sure. So I can touch on a few things. I'll be 100% honest. We basically talked yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to really review your specific documentation. It's been a while since we've done anything right there in that area. So I'd like to review what you have one more time before I speak directly to that. But I can touch on a bunch of the areas for you, I think, in the short term here, and then obviously tie off any ends that we want to tie off going forward. And I'm happy to help wherever I can. So
appreciate it.
No, not a problem at all. So let's talk about the fencing piece real quick first, because I've heard that a couple times through these conversations. So let me kind of explain what we've done in the past. It seems to work really well. It does accomplish the same goal, and seems to just be a make sense kind of an idea if you're gonna talk ground mount solar for residential work. So, as you made the comment, in a commercial setting, it does have to be fenced off. Typically, there's the requirement's 15 feet between the fencing and the array. And basically that's just to facilitate movement around the field and things like that. It's a preventative piece. In a residential market, we're not talking about the expanse that we're talking about in commercial, industrial, utility scale solar. And so the make sense way to deal with that that we've dealt with in the past is, generally speaking, I guess let me start here and just talk about the way those are mounted. Okay, so ground mount solar, you're going to have piers driven into the ground or concreted into the ground. That's the support structure that's going to hold your panels up. Okay, generally speaking, you're going to have two panels stacked because most of the systems are going to be looking to at least get two vertically in like a portrait orientation, and then that's spread out over that framework. Most racking systems are going to have a groove that basically splits the difference between the panels and creates a center cavity that's a rail that's mounted to. We call those, so that's part of that support structure as well, part of the grounding. What we've done to facilitate that protective barrier, which is really what you're after, right? To keep fingers away from the components, make sure nobody can come over there and play with the connectors, those kind of things, is take a wire mesh. Generally speaking, it's it's pretty tight holes, 1/4 inch maybe, somewhere in there. And then we've basically run that across those purlins, anchoring it every few feet, and then folding up on the ends. The in-ground portion then has what we call like a weather head or a mast coming up, just like you would see on your house if you have aerial wire. It's got that type of a weather head on it. That's then fed up into there, and the wires run right into there, so they're protected all the way outside of that enclosed area.
Hey, Josh,
Yes.
is that industry standard? Is that what everybody does, or is that just what you do? And is it?
I can't say that everyone does that, okay, because I haven't worked for everybody.
Right.
I can tell you that as a generality, that's the way that most residential solar companies I've worked with have handled that issue, because it does create a protective area, and it's the most cost-effective way to make that happen. And it does prevent, again, fingers from getting in there. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So that's, and what I can actually do for you is, I think I can look back through some of our records, and I can probably even pull a couple photos to show you exactly what I'm looking at. If that would help you kind of solidify in your mind what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? Sure, absolutely. Make a note here. So one of the other comments that came up was kind of just understanding how this works. So does it make sense for me to kind of give you maybe the boiled down version of solar in general, or do you all feel comfortable in that space at this point? I just want to make sure I'm understanding where the group is as a whole.
I think we understand solar. We've been living and breathing it for the last couple of years now, it seems like, especially on some of these larger projects. And the part that I want to emphasize for the group here is residential does not benefit to make more energy than what they actually use. So this was the conversation I was having with a additional board member the other day, that if they're only going to use two kilowatts a year, that they're not going to put in a 3 kilowatt system. There's not an advantageous point to sell energy back to the grid on that low of scale, because you have to sell it at a wholesale price.
Right. Yeah. You're never going to make money on a residential market scale. Yeah, that's just not worth it. You're absolutely right. What other types of questions might you have that I can maybe tie off for you, or at least take some bullet points away that I can maybe give you some additional information on to help push forward in this process?
So I'm assuming that most of these do not have setbacks from the residents or from adjacent residents. I've seen some of them in subdivisions even, and curious how.
So most of them are going to use the same setbacks that are required for buildings if you're going to talk about a ground mount array.
Good.
Because you just really don't want to deal with that, whereas the actual lot line issue, right?
Yep.
There's also some that have some height restrictions associated with them.
And I'm sure we'll have something written into that to our ordinance. We already have that currently in our large SES projects. So what's the minimum and what's the maximum that you've seen or you want to speak to?
You know, so the one thing we want to remember is that we do live in Northern Illinois, right? And so one of the things mid-northern, Illinois in general. Let's talk snow for a minute. So the minimum clearance we're going to want to be talking about is probably 2 feet underneath the panels, plus the slope. So I'd have to give you a top elevation based on what's traditional panels right now, because I don't remember that off the top of my head. But usually it's 2 feet clearance on the bottom, and then basically the generally what you see is they'll allow for basically 2 panels in portrait stacked, which basically works out to, call it a story ish. I would say you're probably talking that 10-12 feet at most.
Perfect.
But I can confirm that number for you too. So
what about panels on roofs?
So there's some code requirements there as well, and a lot of that has to do with fire. So I actually serve on our rural fire department here in town. And then, so obviously I have a keen interest in what those codes look like as well. Clearance around them is important, but that's all required pretty much by your NECs and things like that at this point. I guess my question is, you know, as a community, what's your thought process on visibility? Because I'll be honest with you, I'm in the market, so I think they look great on a roof, but but I'm not the only voice in the room. So I guess where do you want to go with that question?
I just throw it out because as we're looking at going from commercial solar to residential solar, and we're looking at all these things, you know, if you drive around, you see them on roofs of buildings already. So I look at what other people are doing and what's acceptable.
Sure. So the biggest concern as it relates to that is more from a visibility than anything else, because the NEC code already restricts how the wires run, how, you know, you're spacing around it from a fire perspective, those kind of things. Now you could always, you know, as you are well aware, modify those or increase those however you feel fit. That's your right to do. But as a generality, you know, most requirements are, you know, 3 feet around the edges of the roof to make sure there's walking room. Most of them will allow you to go all the way up to the ridge, but they don't want you to go beyond the ridge, which makes sense because most of your mounting hardware's got to mount to the trusses or to the, I guess it just depends what kind of roof style it is, but the advantage, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We have Kendall County's ordinance in front of us, and theirs does say cannot extend beyond the perimeter of the roof. So I think there's something there that we have to discuss, but we can also based off of each scenario. So
yeah, and that would be, I mean, those are my biggest concerns. The real advantage, honestly, solar panels are actually gonna take abuse more than your typical shingle or asphalt roof would. They're gonna sustain, they'll take larger hail hits without any damage, and their watershed is basically, it's just the same as you would get off your normal roof. So it actually increases the lifetime of a roof, the life expectancy, except for the area, because it's also protecting it from UV as well. And so that's coming from prior to coming into this, I actually worked for MetLife Auto and Home, which is now Farmers, for about 13 years as a field adjuster. So I inspected roofs and things like that for damages resulting from incidences, hail, wind, all that good stuff. So.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, no, he
Hold on.
probably can't hear you.
That one's good.
Okay.
We'll keep that one back.
Just in terms of the height, if other communities have put in restrictions because it would block your neighbor's access to solar. If it's residential and your system is too high, it's going to block your neighbor from getting solar.
So Tom, I asked you, like our current ordinance right now on SES is 20 feet. Is that going to be too much or is that too little?
20. Well, you said for residential, probably, I guess, would be okay. It depends on, you know, where your neighbor's located and how that might work.
Yeah, and the other issue that we do have some subdivisions, but we're not talking about what can happen in Dixon. We're talking about the rural portion. So, but right now I think 20 feet is.
And that's fine. I just thought it'd be
Trying to keep the consistency between it, that if it would work in this scenario, then yeah, by all means, let's
just keep you aware of that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Just to kind of tie into that just a little bit, one of the things that you kind of want to keep in mind is that in a residential market, as you are going to be using fixed tilt, you're never going to have a system that's tracker, at least at this point, because they're just not cost effective. They're always going to be situated pointing south. And so as a generality, when they're doing the engineering work, they're going to be looking at the shading profile coming off of those panels. And they're going to look at the year-round effect. So they're going to be able to tell you where that actual shade is going to be cast, even in the winter solstice, which would be the lowest sun point.
You want to dive into community solar a little bit and try to explain the, oh, D has one more. We recommend rural fire inspecting the roofs.
That's going to be just to make sure I understood the question. Do I recommend that rural fire departments inspect roofs?
Correct.
Fire and police.
To some extent, that's going to depend on the department that you have. If they have an inspector that typically would come out and look at building code type issues, it's not a terrible idea. However, if you're honestly, it's more about the electrical inspector than it is about the rest of it. Because what you really want to make sure is that there's no that your wiring is going to be seamless from A to B. You don't have splice boxes, those kind of things. It's really, I'll be honest with you, putting the racking system together up on the roof, it pretty much only works one way. The spacing can change a little bit, so but you're going to notice those problems right away, and they're going to have to be fixed right away. It's really the biggest concern there is electrically, and the electrical inspector as a generality would be able to determine those problems.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I think the problem is when I look at some of our rural fire departments, they don't have the personnel capable of that. Like,
I'll be honest with you, we don't do it in my area. Even with what I do on a day-to-day basis, that's not one of the requirements in our
do you have an
area.
electrical inspector have to look at them?
So again, that depends on each of the areas, whether they have an inspector on staff or not. But yeah, if there's an electrical inspector available, typically they look over the plans, and then they're going to make a decision based on the power production, whether they're going to actually stop out and look at it or not. Usually it's just for the final sign off if they do.
Okay.
Just so you guys know, Lee County does not currently require any inspection because we do not have an inspector. So.
As I.
And that's exactly why I phrase it that way.
And yeah, you're right. So, any other questions in regards to residential?
Just a concern, I guess. Do you recommend that in our case, we would require an inspector to look at it? I mean, is the opportunity there to have these things installed poorly and have fire issues? I mean, there's something down the road we can come back and haunt us if we don't take care of the road?
No, it's not really going to come back on you. I guess my comment would be is if you ever had a contractor come out and build a bad home.
Yep.
Kind of the same deal. I mean, I hate to be that kind of blunt about it, but it's I mean, does it exist for a brand new person or somebody who's just kind of fluffed their way along, for lack of a better way to say that, to install it badly? Absolutely. And that's where I think that the homeowner is responsible to do their due diligence and ensure that the person that they're putting their money with and having do the work is a reputable company that's going to stand behind the work that they're doing.
Okay.
Just saying she depends on the engineer's letter. And to your point, I can't protect every single fly by night. You've got to take some responsibility as a homeowner. My mind is we're trying to protect the adjacent homeowners. You have to protect yourself based off the contractor that you choose. If you want to save a buck to have me put it in, well, then you're going to get quality work by Chris Norton.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, and the same thing is homeowner generally has the opportunity to install things themselves in their own home, right? So,
Right.
They're not necessarily certified to do it. Not that there's necessarily certifications. There are certifications out there, but they're not. But they're more along the engineering lines and the design lines than they are specifically about installation.
Do you feel that adding or including language that requires a licensed electrician to do the installation would prevent some of the shoddy work.
That helps. The thing you have to remember there as well, though, is when we're talking about solar panels, we're talking about DC power. Most electricians are certified in AC power. There's not a huge difference, but there is a difference there in the way they operate and the way they work. So just because they were trained and brought up to run, your breaker system in your house and power your outlets and switches doesn't mean that they're automatically ready to go and install solar. I would want somebody that has spent some time to do the research to say, here's how this works and here's what my expectation should be. And therefore, here's what your expectations should be. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And to the point that we had the other day, that they're not overly complicated
They're
to
not.
put together. Like, let's just, that you could, if I really wanted to do some research, I could put 80% of it together
Mhm.
with very little background to it. So I have a hard time telling a homeowner that he can't do the work on his own house.
I agree with you.
Okay,
Go ahead.
one clarification. If the carpenters union was installing these, would you guys hire an electrician to do the final hookup, or is it something you feel comfortable with? You would or would not? Okay, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but that brings me back then to, if I built a new home, you would require an inspection, would you not? County doesn't care what I do?
No.
Ah, okay.
Not on anything.
Not on anything.
Okay. Okay,
You're a good builder.
okay, that resolves my question then. All right,
Then I wouldn't think we would treat this any different then,
right.
right?
Agreed, yeah.
Any,
Kind of where I was headed.
Yeah.
Josh, we really appreciate everything you're giving us. Moving on from residential, can we talk about community solar and kind of define that for us? Give us a little hand on that, because I'm trying to get my brain wrapped around and struggling too. So if you can kind of
Yeah,
define the difference between the two.
Well, let me actually walk you through. There's really 4 big branches of solar. All right.
Okay.
The first is residential, right? So that's going to be individual party designed to power the home that it's connected to. It's behind their meter, which means it's powering them before it goes anywhere else. The next stage is going to be what we would call commercial or industrial. Again, still behind their meter, but much bigger sites, right? So we're talking, large scale, farms. So they might be looking for, 200-300 kW systems to power their grain legs and things like that, up to, fabrication facilities, factories. They might be up to, we've done them as large as 2.5-3 megawatts that are just powering a single entity location. And that's really more based on their land size. Okay. The next subset would be community solar. That's connected directly into the grid. So it has its own dedicated meter. It's tracking power production at that site specifically. And it's being pushed out into the grid and then sold directly to homes within that network. And so that, I say network because that changes state to state, local to local, all those kind of things, depending on the utility company. And then the final 4th one would be utility scale, which is basically selling directly to the power company production, and then it's theirs to do with as they wish. Okay. So community solar, which is what you're talking about here.
So yeah, the third entity that you're
right. So that one is really, it's like I said, it's grid tied, and the power's basically being sold using your utilities network to get it to the households within that area. Generally speaking, because of legislation and stuff like that in the state and nationally, most of those you're going to see are somewhere between that 2 and 3 megawatts DC range. I think you may even start to see some increases, but as a generality, that's kind of where they're sitting right now, because that's where it makes the most sense, build cost wise. Questions on that specifically? What are we looking to talk about there?
That's
on that piece?
approximately 20 acres and less.
Yeah, I usually say in that realm, right around 20 acres for up to 3 megawatts is about right. Layouts vary, wetland delineations can make differences, those kind of things, but generally.
Okay, so it's just, in reality, it's kind of a small SES.
Yeah.
Like, and how many of those do we think we're gonna have coming in?
So Josh was a part of the project out by Paw that was developed by Nextamp. It is community solar. So that is currently our only solar development in Lee County that has been built. That's approximately 20 acres out at Paw, Josh.
Yeah, it'd be about right. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. So
It looks like about 20.
usually I figure it's about, in this scale, usually it's about 5 acres per megawatt is usually how I kind of ballpark it. So it's probably somewhere between 15 and 20.
Josh, if you could do me a favor at your convenience, can you look at our current SES ordinance? I'll have Allison B send it to you and see if the community solar would be able to comply with the ordinance in place today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Too much restriction. Otherwise, if it needs to be massaged, tailored down. I know that there's a lot of money in there and decommissioning and some other stuff, but if it would fit without having to reinvent the wheel, that'd be fantastic. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. I know with the residential one, we're gonna have to write something. I think we all here know that residential and even small commercial on-site use, we need to do something different with. But the community solar is where I'm scratching my head of, we need a third ordinance or can we use a first ordinance type of thing? So would you agree, Mr. Ballard? As an observer in the back here. Yeah.
Farm Bureau agree with you.
Farm Bureau, you guys got anything to add, or anybody else got anything to add there, or questions for Josh? Tom? Yeah, battery backup, we can dive right into it right now. So battery,
So I think we have harsh score with the pipeline waiting on Zoom. So
Okay.
do we want to?
if you could, Josh, I got no other questions other than battery backup, but we can address that. If you'd be so kind to join us maybe the next meeting and kind of let us know on the community solar, if our current SES ordinance would work for community solar. And then maybe we can dive into some battery backup a little bit too from a residential. I do have Kendall counties here in front of us, and it does address battery backup and battery storage in their ordinance. So we can look at some of that. But
Yeah, in the meantime, if you want to send that over to me, I'll take a peek at it. I'll see if I can't pull some photos for the residential piece for you, so I can have those for you next time. And then if you want to let me know when the meeting is for sure, I'll take a look at my calendar and see if I can't even show up, so as to make sure I can hear the room fully.
that's fine.
and
If we
keep
knew
that
we were
moving.
gonna have this many and this many questions and this much engagement, we'd have put the batteries in the microphone. So it's fine. We'll be prepared next time.
It's all good. No, I really appreciate the time, everybody, and looking forward to it. And I think we can do some sensible things here that'll work out really well for you guys. So,
Thank
all
you.
right.
Thank you, Josh.
Have a great one. Bye.
I missed where the people.
He's from Fossler Construction, and he is the,
Okay, you guys referenced that company before.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
From free, you guys knew that. Yep.
He's from Freeport.
Freeport. Perfect. I thought it was great information.
And that one's functioning, that pop-up.
So, I mean, it's,
Harsh.
Harsh.
Four.
Huh?
Better than
First
Pawpaw.
I always never know. I mean, for me, it's just the road. I think it's South Pawpaw Road.
If I'm in town, I'm out south, east, west.
You know where Moffett Road is?
How about we take a road trip?
I was like,
I know where Casey's is. Pardon?
It's- yeah.
Yep.
Yep, there it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's around a curve
Okay.
before you get into town.
Okay,
So
I just
to
like
go
to drive over. and look
Yeah.
at it. I'll spend some money on it.
Yeah, I would say I can take some pictures too. It's not bad. I do think it looks, for me personally, I think there's a lot of, like, it looks neat all around it, but I don't know that we have anything that, when you just kind of first glance at it, it just, the surrounding part, the solar part looks good, it's just kind of around it,
Okay,
but,
but this was,
Maybe it's something that needs to be addressed.
you know, I mean, I guess if you just drive by and look, for me, used to seeing,
I was in the road.
Cleaned up
I
because of
didn't even
farms.
Notice one going into
They
the
are
road,
unmuted.
coming out, the
Hey, guys,
southwest.
we're gonna circle back and we're gonna push into pipeline. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Morning. We're doing great. How's everyone in Illinois?
Oh, we got some rain and the sun shining, so life is good.
Nice.
So, Mr. Kitson and I had the opportunity to listen to both of you guys talk the other day and kind of get a chance to circle back around and now you've got the whole committee here in front of you. And go ahead and Tom, do you have any questions from our conversation or do you just want them to kind of
No,
fill in?
Let's see where we go. and then we
Okay,
can
so
get these guys up
and
to
who is
date.
this on? Sorry, I didn't catch who it was.
they're with Autobahn.
Autobahn?
Autobahn?
Yep, AUBUBON.
I know when we spoke here last Friday, that we talked about the AMA. And I was hoping you guys had a chance to look at the AMA and if you guys are gonna be able to comply with that. And after looking at it, it's really the bread and butter of what our ordinance is gonna be written around. It really covers all the boxes and really no other choice other than you guys can either comply with it or not comply with it because it's set by the state. So
And that's not a good option.
yeah, exactly.
Not an option at all.
So
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so I actually did look over the AMA agreement, and from what I understood, it seemed very typical of pipeline construction. It may have been worded differently in some variations across states that I've seen in the past, but overall, again, it's all very typical construction material. Like we saw the depth of cover, the information about the tiling, notification, and just having a permit on site. You know, it's very, very typical type of information. So it shouldn't be an issue. I'm actually currently in coordination with the state. I established a point of contact with someone with that Department of Agriculture earlier this week. So I need to circle back up with him to see the true applicability with the state itself. But other than that, there's really nothing new or out of left field on the AMA itself.
okay, perfect. I know we had talked about essentially a user fee to some level along there, cubic foot of gas going through. I didn't know if you were able to talk to the company on in regards to that, or if you were able to circle back in regards to that conversation.
We looked at it. We were discussing it internally. We looked at other projects we had in the past, and nothing really seemed to mirror what is being requested. So, Nick, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but it'd be better.
I guess
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce somebody else we have on the call, Steve Hall from Amoresco. Steve, looks like you're muted, but I see you as a participant. I don't know if he's able to get off mute.
Give us 1 second. I think they're trying to.
Our technical experts are working on it.
So Steve's already in. He just hasn't been able to unmute.
When we met with them, we're talking about the 7 miles of pipeline. They want to convert the methane gas at the landfill to natural gas, send it 7 miles up Dutch Road to the pipeline and pumped in and processed it. No, they won't actually convert it. I think that's methane. Well, that's not what they told us. I'm just repeating what they told us.
That's what they told us.
I'm just repeating what they told us. Okay? So.
So they would
They said they would
convert from the
clean it up.
landfill.
I'm sorry.
They would convert methane to natural from the
Yeah.
landfill, those
Yeah.
7 miles.
And they're talking permit with that pipeline in. We asked them if there's a possibility of doing some revenue, like tipping fee, that landfill. And that's what they're looking at. Amoresco, this company is doing this,
Okay.
to see if there's some money.
Real quick, Harsh, guys, were you guys converting this methane into natural gas, or is it going to go into the pipeline as cleaned? And I use clean methane. We're discussing that here in the room. Or Nick.
There's a landfill, and at that landfill, it'll collect that landfill gas and then convert it into natural gas. So in the proposed pipeline, it'll be now reclaimed natural gas.
It's claimed as natural gas, not necessarily. It's burnable just like propane, butane. Methane is another.
Is the chemical formula actually natural gas, or will it still be methane? Or can you not expand upon that? You understand the question?
Yeah, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong. It should be natural gas, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's natural gas in the form of biogas.
Okay.
It's my understanding that the quality of the gas will be pure enough to go directly into Kinder Morgan's pipeline. So
Yes, it's commercial grade. It's commercial grade.
So, like I said, the question was if we were able to, is there a revenue source? Is it cubic foot per day? I know that was something we had discussed and didn't know if you guys had a chance to meet with them. Steve doesn't sound like he's able to get unmuted. Maybe he is. Maybe you can text him. Maybe he's on a phone call. Who knows?
We spoke with them about it. We spoke internally, looked at previous projects, and it's not something that we've ever experienced. Typically, we're either crossing right of way, and there's not usually a state fee, or if there is a fee, it's pretty small. And I'd really like for Steve, since it's not our, Harsh and Eric and I work for the Audubon Engineering Company, and I'd prefer to let Amoresco handle, that subject. So it's not something that we've typically seen on projects, and I know, speaking with Amoresco, they haven't seen a similar type of payment structure like that as far as a fee for installation of the pipeline.
Nick, are you able to contact Steve to see if the issue is on our end or his end?
Eric is also on the call. I know he's listening in. And Eric and Steve.
He emailed me. He's not able to get unmuted. So I think he's going to try to leave the meeting and come back in and see if that frees it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pipeline going across private property, county property, private.
A little bit of both. So you guys did ask us to look into the right of way. My understanding, talking to our state's attorney, and you guys can correct me, is that you will be able to use the right of way as long as there's nothing else in the way.
And most
Electrical,
vast
all of it.
majority of this would be along Route 30s right away.
correct.
Now, I'm thinking this, I mean, it's gonna jog around that property there.
That's the one at 26.
Yeah, I know where you're
Yeah,
at.
yeah, this is your world. Yep.
Books, condiments.
Just a couple.
Yeah. The
Oh,
most
no,
obvious.
no, I know, yeah.
So did residential get? I mean, you think about turbine, when somebody wants to put something up, they get something, right?
Come again, sorry.
I would think about turbines, solar farm, you know, the residential piece, they get something for using their land.
Yes, and
Right.
And they'll pay them so much a foot to the ground.
Okay,
We, and in all fairness to you guys,
one time.
we could not have a meeting with all of us because that meeting is postponed.
Yep.
But try to get some information.
No, that
That's what we said,
makes
so.
sense.
Well, I like to explain that.
Yeah,
because
no,
yeah,
It looks like we did something.
No,
And I asked
totally
Mr.
get it.
Kitson because he's the complete opposite of me, which is slow and steady, where I'm like, oh, let's just do everything. So, yeah, so when we met with them, it's a great project. It's going to move forward. The potential to remove methane smell from the air in the adjacent area. They actually have two other projects with this going on with ours and another Republic landfill in the southern part of the state. Is that correct, Eric? Or Nick?
Yes. I guess I did get a message from Eric. He said that the message he's getting is the host will not allow him to unmute. But that is correct. There is another project that Amoresco is planning further south in Vermilion County.
So does Vermilion County have an ordinance or, oh, that AMA, is that what it's called?
AMA is the
It's
It's
the
the
state,
state.
which everybody has to pretty much follow that one.
Vermilion, yeah, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. in my mind,
Right, that's
with
what I was
this.
saying, if they,
Yeah, Vermilion County, you guys are not looking at it, they're not looking at a special ordinance, correct? To make you guys adhere to, other than the AMA requirements?
No, I haven't gotten confirmation from that. I've been in contact with them and we're good to go with the county.
Yeah, they haven't had any special requirements or fees.
Yeah, and it's gonna be in, I believe that's an industrial zone, so it's gonna be a higher tax rate for the building itself. Sorry, we're having some conversations here on revenue. This is a win-win, and it's not. Does anybody else have anything in regards to pipeline that you want to discuss?
sorry.
Is the project under contract with like the landowners that they intend to go through? Because I believe even going through a right of way still requires landowner approval.
You guys
Yes, we're in our planning. We're in our planning stage, and we're working that out with each of the private landowners as needed.
So I don't know if we want to set up a meeting with.
honestly, the real quick question for the conversation is, were they going to be able to comply with the AMA, which it was either yes or no, and the project moved forward, or it doesn't? Were they going to be able to pay based off of cubic foot per day. And it doesn't sound like that's something they've done in the past. And your question to us was whether or not you could use the right of way. And our answer is yes. With landowner
approval.
approval, but yes. So I think we can move forward with some stuff here on our end, figuring out some zoning fees and permit fees along those lines. And I don't see a reason. I believe you guys wanted to start construction next summer. I don't see a reason why, as long as we can get something figured out here that
We want to have it done by December. So
for this one particularly. I think
December of,
of
this year.
we want to have an
No,
ordinance. in place.
okay,
Have
okay.
something for them to
Okay,
be
but the
able to work with.
construction by.
Next summer.
Next
Right.
summer.
Yes.
Okay, so here we're looking at South Dixon Township. Here we're in Marion Township, or is this City of Amboy?
That's Marion Township.
I know it's Marion Township, but I don't know how far
Yes.
City of Amboy comes up.
The city of Amboy is within their project
Part of
footprint,
it, because.
and they have been in contact with them.
Okay.
Because, yeah, City of Amboy,
City
and
of Amboy is
extend,
kind of weird out there.
well, they brought in the landfill so they
yeah.
can. Okay,
So
and they've,
do we have to meet with City of Amboy to get this all approved?
They don't have any requirements. so-
Marion Township and South Dixon both turned it over to whatever the county decided from a zoning standpoint, that it was our responsibility. So we'll get working on this. I think you've answered our questions. Not that I wish you had a different answer for me, but you at least answered my question about the essentially the tipping fee.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks for giving us the time, and I apologize for some of the technical difficulties.
No, you're perfectly fine. And yeah, we appreciate the project and look forward to it moving forward.
I guess I just got a message. I'd like to try one more time just to see if Steve Hall has any comments. He said he's dialed in, and I don't see a mute button next to his name. So I'll just give him a couple of seconds, and then you guys could move on.
Okay.
It doesn't sound like it's working, so I apologize. So thank you.
So where do we go? You guys are still on board with this, and we just need to get an ordinance together. Right?
We need an ordinance and updated zoning fees.
Okay. So we'll be in touch with them.
We'll be in touch through Dee and Alice to you guys to figure out what everything's going to be from a zoning standpoint and fees. But I don't see a reason why we can't just take the AMA.
Right.
It's not like there's setbacks. It's something that's got to go 5 feet in the ground, so you'll never see it. Anybody else? One place. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we need to set them with enough time to vote and by December.
Well,
right?
okay, so my question is, do we even need an ordinance? If they have to comply by EMA standards, regardless, like that's set by the state, we're not going to do any additional, we're not going to put in any additional restrictions above and beyond AMA. Is there really an ordinance that we even have to?
Do we want some oversight?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, in our conversation, when we asked them about the AMA, they weren't aware of it. So I think we at least need to have something in our ordinance stating they must comply with the AMA at minimum. So
Do you want to put together something very generic that says,
I can.
like, I don't think you have to rewrite AMA. And you can just
No.
rewrite, just say they have to comply with AMA statute number, blah, blah, blah. That way, if it changes,
I'll probably look at the language we use for solar and the reference made to the AMA and that and do something similar. So
okay. I
I think we want something that gives us a little hands-on, rather than just turn it all over to the state.
And all of a sudden, they don't comply with AMA. We're back to where we were with some of these windows.
Something goes wrong, we've got to,
so
Which
do you,
may mean we want whatever we put together my opinion, you might want Charlie to take a quick look at. It's
Definitely.
Yeah.
a lesson for us, you know.
Yes.
Yep.
Definitely.
Are you wanting to include requirements for site plans, drainage tile map?
I think that's in EMA already,
Is that all covered?
Yes, we do.
but yes, if not,
Yeah.
then
We don't want tearing up somebody's
Mhm.
drainage, walking away.
You guys want the AMA? I have one on my computer. I can print.
I think you emailed it out and I glanced at it, but I did not thoroughly read it.
And essentially it's making sure the farmland's protected, tile and soiling and all that. But it's kind of like an after the fact thing. So if there's stuff that we're gonna want at the front end, we'll want to include that in the ordinance. So,
Front site plans, or something like that.
You know, we want control of the things that are supposed to be in AMA afterwards. We want control of those as it's going in.
Yeah.
okay, makes
We don't know
sense.
that, we protect our property.
Clear as mud. Okay, Mr. Gates. Greg has come to me with an idea and a thought, and I want him to kind of explain it to the group, because I think it's something that we at least need to talk about and address.
I guess I was pulled into some of this conversation piece, and it just putting my grant writer hat on, resource development grant hat on just for a minute. And it seems as though if we're really committed to going in this renewable green direction, would it be beneficial for the county actually to formulate a plan of some nature? And I've already, think I sent to Allison, maybe to Chris, a couple of documents that may push us in this direction. So basically developing, formalizing a plan that shows what the county's intentions are in terms of being renewable or green in nature. And I think from my perspective, just taking that first step down the road was, if we ever would go in the direction of seeking grant funding for any type of project that's related in that vein, they would find that rather impressive that the county has already formalized this in some nature, and probably would actually give us a greater chance of getting some funding, potentially private or government in support. And that's really the 2-minute elevator spiel in terms of what my thought was. And it sounds like it would be perfect for this group to at least kick around and consider. But, and I can easily send out those other documents, because literally I think I went 30 seconds into Google, typed in renewable county plan. And I think the plan that came up was actually, forgive me, the acronym was, I think it was the association, maybe it was NACO, National Association of County Governments, that had already substantiated something of that nature that we could actually borrow or go off of. But that was my 2 thoughts, just to bring to the committee.
My first reaction on this is, how would this fit with our county's comprehensive plan?
Exactly. And that, I think, was another discussion point that we had, was it would tie in very nicely with the comprehensive plan, Maryland.
And I know that we need to readdress the comprehensive plan. And I think they can kind of go hand in hand. If we get all these solar projects up and running, the amount of energy that we're going to create is going to be equal to that of the nuclear power plant. Like, we have so much energy coming out of Lee County right now between wind and solar. Logan County is, I believe it's Logan County that's #1 right now in renewable energy production. Lee County is #2, and with all the projects that are moving forward, to Greg's point, we can do some stuff right now that may just seem like window dressing, but in the future can be very beneficial. It goes back to like the Green River, help me with what you helped Dixon with, the trail program, Greenway Trail that the county had put together in 2010 or 13 or something, that Dixon was able to capitalize on financially from a grant that was really just window dressing back then. but it brought a couple $1 million to Lee County and Dixon in particular. So I think this is the step in the right direction as we continue to realize that we need to benefit from green energy and grants together. So Greg, I can forward on, or Alice, you have the email, she'll forward it on so we can discuss it some more, but I think we need to definitely do something as far as, like I said, to me, some sense it's just window dressing today, but
Well, but we're moving pretty fast in all these areas of things we're doing. Forming this group is certainly a step in the right direction. And then formalizing the real plan fits into the comprehensive plan. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely.
I feel like we're
It's a flag in the ground.
flying very fast and we're not anchored somewhere. We need to do that, so we do have the direction.
Perfect. Okay, so is there anything else that you think we're not ready for battery backup or batteries? So do we want to begin on putting together something for residential and, or even call it on-site storage? Or do we think we have enough information yet? Do we think we want to, you all have Kendall counties in front of you. Which I think we can mimic to some level.
Kendall counties does cover the on-site, off-site use.
Yep, it says on page 3, it says 120% of the electrical needs of the needs, so they can build it a little bit bigger than what they currently are using. And I think of that as like a grain elevator, because the problem with the grain elevator is they have a high draw in September, October, November, maybe even December, and then virtually no draw in June, July, and August.
Wouldn't that be considered commercial though?
Come again?
Wasn't the grain elevator considered commercial?
A grain elevator would be, it would be a commercial, but it wouldn't be sold.
In other words, it'd be
It-
for their own
It'd be
use.
for their
not-
own
Well,
use, right?
You know, it'd
Oh,
be
I
what
thought you
like
said
you
it
talked about,
followed,
it's
okay.
behind your meter.
Correct, yes. And then my question is, do we have to have one that's different between commercial and residential? Commercial and residential, as long as it's behind the meter, does it really matter to us whether it's going on, because most of the grain elevators are gonna be private grain elevators, whether it be
Yep.
anybody in this room or,
Well, size issue, though. I mean, factory could have a couple acres land they want to put solar on, in a residential is,
one panel.
right?
You know, I mean,
So I
this
don't,
is within the city limits, but as an example, at Corner of Dutch and Progress Drive, Donaldson has got, I don't know how big it is. But obviously that's, I'm assuming for their own use.
Correct.
And I
2
think that's the
acres.
kind of thing
2
we're talking
acres?
about here.
acres or less is what he's saying.
Boss has the same thing. I like to do the lighting center, the whole field. So, carpet boss, owns a building that lighting centers in,
Okay.
and they build that between that and Fort Warner, they build solar panels.
Okay.
So I mean, we can make the distinction with zones, and residential zone and commercial zone.
Special ag use 1. Special use ag 1 would probably fall under residential because more than likely it's going into a grain elevator. I don't know.
Well, you can have an ag 1, you can have a residence in ag 1.
Correct.
So,
I
but
just,
are there some residential zones out in the country? I guess that's my question.
there are subdivisions.
The subdivisions. Let's say okay, let's just be a specific thing.
Okay.
I've got 2 acres where I live in Foxtrot.
Yep.
So let's say I decided to put in a solar system. My house, the roof face west, so a roof mounted would not do me any good.
Correct.
So it'd have to be a ground-based system. So what kind of requirements would we need, you know? Keep kids in subdivision away from it.
Let's all use our microphones because these guys are streaming
Yeah.
here.
Okay.
Sorry,
I'm
guys.
sorry, we're talking, but everybody can't hear us.
Okay, I said, we'll just use my residence. I'm in the county, in a rural subdivision, Fox Run. I've got 2 acres. The way my house is situated, a roof mounted would not do me any good because my roof faces east and west. So if I were to put in solar, and I'm just using my property as a guinea pig, you know, it would have to be a ground mounted system. So what would I want? I'd want something to keep the neighborhood kids from running between the panels, climbing on the panels. You know, to me, I see that as different than a farm residence where it's your own kids that are there. You know, I've had neighbor kids that run across my lawn. I had some stakes last year out to plant some evergreens, and the kids went and pulled the stakes and were playing with them. And, you know, kids are going to be kids.
Right.
So, you know, that's the first thing I see about a ground mounted residential system. If we're talking about out in the county, I think in a subdivision probably is the most likely place that we need to look at it.
Yeah, we're not worried about my house, right?
No,
Where it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and if there's any kids around there, your kids, and you can go and
Right.
discipline them.
The difference is she's in an R2 and you're Ag 1. So, I mean, maybe we can, you know,
But if you start putting fencing requirements in R2, you're not, people are, it's going to scare people away
Yeah.
from putting in these projects. To his point, to Josh's point, that they do have the system to protect the electrical portion, the most
The mesh.
dangerous, the mesh. Can they still break the glass? Absolutely. But and kids are gonna be kids. You shake your head like,
You've
it's
got
pretty
kids.
hard to, they're pretty durable. I was watching the meeting last night. It's durable up to 150, 140 mile per hour wind. So a rock going at it is probably not.
and that's what they're saying, you know, they withstand the hail damage and, you know, so they are very durable.
But I don't care about the equipment itself. I care about the people.
Yeah,
Equipment can be
kids.
replaced, right?
You know, if a kid is climbing on it and falls off of the thing, breaks an arm or a leg, what, you know?
Yeah, but kids will be kids.
Yeah.
To some level too. So that's the $1 million question we have to ask ourselves. Do we and I think that's the distinction. Is it residential areas? Does it have a fence? And in ag, it doesn't have a fence, but you're going to scare a lot of people off.
I do. Okay, just a couple things. I think I emailed them to Chris, but it might be helpful just for definitions to comply or to coordinate with the new energy legislation that was passed when you may be like referencing your ordinances, because the companies will probably be using that as well. So that might be a uniformity issue that you might want to consider.
When come out last time?
No, I emailed these after the meeting, but then I know we talked the last time and I got some facts for you for sizes of some ag facilities that have some solar on it. So let me look at my email here. So it appears, based on some listings that are out there, that panels installed on farms have been ranging from 30 kilowatts to 200 kilowatts in size. There is a Growmark distribution center, not a grain facility, in Alpha, Illinois, with a 500 kilowatt system. And then there's a pork packing plant with a 2 megawatt array. But typically most farm size installations are usually 200 kilowatt or less. So that came.
How many acres would that be?
For what?
For
2
200
acres?
For 200 kilowatts.
I am not sure of that.
It wouldn't be very much.
be considerably smaller than.
But so those are the sizes that have been up to this point have been installed on ag.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask Farm Bureau, and both of you have green setups, like, do you think fencing should be mandated around the property? If it's going on a grain elevator, on your brother-in-law's farm, that's gonna be used to run the grain legs and everything, should I have to put a fence on? Can we mandate that you put a fence on it? What's Farm Bureau stance on it?
I would say we don't have an official stance on the fencing on that property, but I would say that, I mean, there's other risks on that property besides just the solar, right? And I think that those risks are there regardless of whether those panels are there and that those farms are currently operating as is. So I'm not sure that I view the addition of these panels by any sort of increased risk on those properties.
And that's, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah,
That
well,
makes
what additional risk would be what as compared, I mean, as he spoke before, basically, instead of a fence around the property, a fence around all components that could be an issue. All you have is a physical piece of a nice slide and a jungle gym. What basic risk do you have other than, I don't mean to yell, but it.
Right, no,
You don't
and
have a
you're,
microphone, so that's okay.
to your exact point, you could run in, the kid could put down his head and run into the side of the building, and we can't prevent him from doing that. Like,
You put a bird bath up, it can fall on somebody.
I put a jungle gym, I put a playhouse there, like at a certain point, you can't, kids are gonna be kids, accidents are gonna happen.
Or win-win.
Is that a question for Josh? For the future, when it's out secure, the leak towards the one in Pawpaw. It was pretty hard.
It was pretty hard to get your hands even where those electrical components are. So it might be a good question for him as to how secure all of that is. Maybe that makes a difference. I don't know.
I think they do have fencing though.
Perfect.
Yeah, I have a system on my own house. My question was, it might be that the insurance companies would demand that it be fenced. And if you don't fence it, your liability is greater and it would cost you more for insurance.
Swimming pool, is it an insurance issue or is it a zoning issue?
In the city, it's a zoning
Insurance.
issue.
Oh, is it?
Is it? You know, in a residential area, I could see where we want to be
Microphone.
fenced somehow. But I would agree with Danielle on the farm.
There's just inherent risk,
There's,
but
there's
I'm,
more risks on
In
the
the
farm
grain
than
bin
playing
in
on
general, it's dangerous, so,
Climb up the grade.
Right.
and jump off.
that. Yeah.
I mean,
but if you
There's
start,
elevators running, and elevators
Right.
moving, and, you know.
but and I don't think that's the concern is in the middle of nowhere. I think the concern is in Maryland's in a residential subdivision, but even in town, I don't see it either. And I know I can go over to half a dozen as well as you can that they don't have.
I mean, if you're in that neighborhood where you got those kids, you fence them. I mean, my old house was fenced. My kids didn't fall off a wall in the back and to keep my dog in. It wasn't, you know, with an ordinance, but I chose to do it.
I think that you're going to scare a lot of people away in a residential area from promoting green on their own on their own residence if you require a fence.
I would agree. I think it can be addressed maybe down the road, see how it goes. If there's a lot of reports of a lot of issues, I mean, ordinances change all the time, right?
But they've been doing residential solars
Yeah.
for 15, 10, 5 years, 8 years, and it's not like any other counties mandating fences around it, because you can clearly see that you drive
Mhm.
around to Whiteside,
Yeah, I don't
DeKalb,
see 'em.
Ogle County, you don't see it even in the residential, so. Oh, we are, we're Lee County. I just, so the question is, do you separate it between residential and ag, or is it just a very generic?
You know, if it's in an egg zone, say, I don't know where you live, but if you're
Yeah,
on a farm,
Yep.
That to me still is a little bit different than my residence.
I agree.
But I don't know, I also agree that fence around it's gonna discourage people. I just don't know the answer.
I wouldn't go with a fence on either to begin with. I don't see them anywhere that I've looked, any out in the country in residents. I don't see fences.
And that goes back to my point that if the fence is the thing, we know, I love the language in here where it can only be 120% of your electrical needs. That makes sense. So it doesn't matter if it's a grain elevator or a home, you can only build it so big. And even if it's a commercial, they can only build so big. Do we have to have different ordinances for all these different industries? Otherwise, we're just going to have an ordinance to have an ordinance about an ordinance.
The 120 or so percent is based on your usage. That is a rule, like comment, basically, so that they're not buying.
Oh, I guarantee.
That's been worked out between the government and your electric.
Yeah, and
utility. That isn't, that's a state rule or something that they
I don't
worked
know.
out.
Is it a
You
state
can't-
rule?
Not everybody can build everything, so, all right, gonna use that as the basis of the ruling, or?
I think you do. I think ComEd would love it if you built one that was 200 and they could pay you wholesale pricing. They could turn around and sell for retail pricing and
Well, yeah, they
Like,
have no problem.
yeah,
And
they're
there
making
again,
money.
there's nothing to say you can't build bigger. It's just that you're gonna be reimbursed at a far less rate.
Right.
For oversized.
Well, and so that's where I go back to at 120%, like a grain elevator, a farmer's got the equity to go and do it. And he's gonna have a high draw, but we also, if you're trying to sell it for commercial use, then that needs to fall into the SES. And I think that's the reason for that type of language.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
language is only written by. Not how big it's going.
I was just gonna say that the language based on the legislation just passed has defined at the community level. So they call it Community Renewable Generation Project, but I believe that that also incorporates some of the residential because it's based on where the meter goes. But it says is limited in nameplate capacity to less than or equal 5,000 kilowatts.
There's a lot of stuff.
Oh, there's, and some are mandated by the state, but I think they're just reiterating it. I think as I. Please. I don't think it needs to be, we have it currently that it's 20 feet or less. I think we're all kind of in agreement there that we want to keep that consistency. You have to have your zoning requirements for setbacks. Doesn't matter, it's got to be setbacks. Fencing, there's no screening. Is there screening in a residential area? Uh-huh. I'm just asking the question. I absolutely
But-
agree, but it,
But if I live next door and don't want to look at your solar panels,
I should go to the trees.
Yeah.
It's my property.
yeah.
Yeah, yes and no. I actually think there's something in the state law that dictates shade on solar.
Yes, there is. It's the state of Illinois.
Yeah, I know that they're very pro about having residential solar, and so there are limits to what we can do as a county. But I know I've seen language that prevents people from building structures that would impede on solar, so.
Tom, you kind of addressed that, correct? That,
Urban areas.
right.
A lot of communities, residential communities have their own rules on how high of a building and stuff. I know a guy that just built a little gazebo or something, and it was beyond standard. So communities got their own right, residential communities, say how high, how big, how, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And some have even more standards that the community has to come out.
We don't have nature land.
You're talking like in an HOA type of scenario?
But there's,
I'm talking the whole
no,
city,
there's also covenants, there's covenants in my subdivision. But nobody, they're not honored. You can't have a 1 or 3 car garage and I can find you 3 places in the subdivision where there's 4 car garages. So,
Right, right,
But you know, like in the city, you can only build a fence so high on the top.
right.
So I mean, there are those.
You end up having
ordinances.
a
Yeah.
group of people who are bad. Important.
But maybe what we need is, from what Allison said, and what Danielle said, we need to be looking at some of the legislation and see what's out there also. So we not only don't reinvent the wheel, but we don't flatten the tire. But we get something that's illegal.
Right, like the state says I can't do what I want on my own property. Well, then I guess I have to follow that, but.
Yeah.
You know, the state supersedes everything we do.
Mhm.
So
Right, but we also have it in here, the decommissioning of a solar farm, like, require,
But you're looking at ordinance now for the residential.
I'm looking for an ordinance right now. I'm taking the current ordinance and kind of pulling
Right.
through some of the things that we need to
Right,
discuss.
I'm saying as we do that, maybe we need this legal stuff to look at and see what has changed.
you know, decommissioning, you know, again, it's on your own property, it's. But then what happens when you sell it? What, you know? There's a lot of things to consider there.
We require $1 million in per accident insurance. You start putting those type of numbers on a house, on a resident. Just things that,
I mean, we may even have to put a size limit on that ordinance as well, anything over so many megawatts. Because we don't want to cause problems for the community solars that are coming in. If we require half of what we require for the large ones, we won't be able to build, so.
well, that's why, where I
Yeah,
asked
yeah, you
Josh
can't-
to,
These
look at
things
that
in the law are not gonna apply to the community.
well, I think that's what I asked Josh to see if it would
Yeah.
comply. And if he comes back and says, yeah, because I never thought that Nelson would be able to comply with the current ordinance that we have in place. And they're like, oh yeah, that works for us. Like, okey dokey.
You know,
Like,
but they got property there that
they
can
got, right.
set back.
And to the, what we've said all along is ordinance have to be living, breathing documents, that if we do get into a point where a community ordinance wants to come in and says, we can't comply with this, then maybe do we address it? But we know that we have residents that are going to want to do that. So I think that's where we need to focus right now. But to your point, I think there's some legislation that's been passed, and you guys can help pull some of that down for residents. And
I know there is for residential, so.
Help us comply, plus it'll make it easier.
correct. So if we can have that next week's committee week, and the week after that is there anything else that we want to discuss in regards to that? You kind of know where we need to go for the pipeline.
Did you want to look at any of the definitions?
Is there anything that you want to point out to us?
You requested that I gather some definitions, so that's.
I
that's all
think those
got
will
for you.
be helpful when we
They'll be
go look
helpful.
at the ordinances.
And,
Very helpful.
and the good thing is Josh kind of addressed the community, which is what I was really struggling with.
I mean, would schools be considered community? I could see schools wanting.
A school would be,
That would probably fall into your commercial industrial. It depends
Really?
on the size, I think.
I mean, think about schools being able to put up a few.
School building is adjacent to maybe, you wouldn't be applying for the whole school.
right.
Right, just for that school building, not,
So then it would
district-wide.
probably be community solar
that's
garden
what I
or
was saying,
something
the
like that.
community, you know, you think of some school buildings putting up a few if it can, they're
That's
already
the
broke, so if
problem
they can
is-
save on energy.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, there's bigger schools, right?
yeah.
Some have windows.
But some are smaller schools that,
So I guess the couple things that I'm gonna ask of Dee and Alice are kind of come up to something for the pipeline. We know what we want. We want to just reinforce AMA. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I've got some ideas for zoning for the permit fee. But if they're not going to be able to supply a tipping fee, I've got some other ideas, so we'll see. We're gonna get it some way, right?
they want it bad enough.
No, we're good. Do we need to? No. I think we're ready to,
You and I should.
yep, you guys could.
We have had no contact from them so far on this project. I would like to talk to them.
And then begin. We know some certain things from the residential solar. I think we should probably focus on that next meeting and really come together with an ordinance, figure out what the legal portion is with Farm Bureau's help. I think they'll be able to help us quite a bit. And whether or not we have to have two different ordinances for a residential or grain elevator system. That's really what it comes down to.
Rural, I don't have a lot of neighbors, but
And that's the problem is we can pick out different
Maybe
scenarios.
something that is generic enough that'll cover your rural, my subdivision. Anything.
because right now,
My solar lights out.
because today's ordinance, neither one of you could have said.
And that's not what we want.
Right, that's why we're here.
Next meeting?
Let's pull up calendars. Committee weeks next week. County board is the 14th. How many people?
County board.
21st.
Yes, I'm sorry, the 21st.
I'm gonna get it. Make sure this one, oh, no, she's got one, that's not.
So we're looking at 15th, a couple weeks.
I'm definitely not looking at the 15th of committee. That's,
Oh, that's right, yeah.
yeah.
I don't have to be here, but I cannot be here. So
I'm already here on the 19th.
Perfect. We can save it per diem.
as in-
For the UTV one.
Oh,
Okay, so you don't want to do both the 19th.
I mean, prefer, if I don't have to drive here twice in a
Oh,
week,
you'd
would
be okay.
Preferable.
Okay,
What
but what time is
time?
that meeting then?
So I block out, I wrote it down. I think it's 10, 11, 10.
You know, we don't
Somewhere
need
around
to
there.
Schedule you two meetings at the
Right.
same time, but two
Yeah,
at the
I
same
think
day
we-
would be.
Yeah, exactly. I blocked out my work calendar from 8:30 to noon, so it's in that vicinity. I gave myself an
are you
hour.
going
drive.
to
I think
check
it's
to
at
see when
10.
the UTV is?
Yeah, we could make it easy on you, drive it.
Right.
And once
It's
again,
the
we
best
could
part of
also,
an hour to get here.
if
About
we,
45 minutes, yeah.
That's the best part.
Good heights.
we're at an hour and a half, so even if your meeting started at 10, we could still start at 8:30.
Right.
And still get through a fair amount of stuff.
They give us enough to get through what you want to do.
I,
I'd like to make it work for her, but
I think we're moving quickly.
yeah,
I think we're gathering the information we need. I think we're finally at the point where we just need to discuss
yeah, I'm fine with
some of that stuff, and that gives them 2 weeks. 10 days. I'll message Joyce.
I would say, I know we agreed, I wrote it down on my other paper, the 19 at, I think we said 10 or 11. Morning. I think he's texting Scruggs.
Oh.
Jack.
You're so
They don't have it added yet. We just met
All right,
on
Chris, I know
Tuesday,
that's how
so.
people talk to them.
that's fine. I don't like anybody. Let's temporarily set it for, you said the 19th.
Yes,
I assume it's probably going to be 10.
I'm assuming it's 10.
Let's temporarily set this meeting for 8:30 to 10 on the 18th,
19.
19th, 19th, 8:30 to 10. Perfect.
It was 10 o'clock? Good. This one will be at 8:30.
Whole day in Dixon.
Yeah, I appreciate you all working with me
The
on
whole
that.
day in Dixon.
Right. Instead of 2.
Day the 19th, day 30.
That's what I have.
Yeah. You guys all hear that? I'm sorry, we're not used to microphone for the thing, all right. We sit here and talk, and I think, gosh, you guys are sitting out there wondering what the heck we're doing. Sorry.
October 19th, 8:30.
We do appreciate all your input, everybody that's here. Very helpful.
We good?
All right.
Working on it. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Turn this back in that door.
Oh, yeah.
Please. Thank you.